Hi everyone, it's Ren here. Welcome to my room, guys. Happy Sunday. Now, today we're going to be talking about INFJs being the oldest type. Oh, can you see this? There's a cat whose interest, I don't know if you saw right there, his interest was piqued for about 1 second. So yeah, we're going to be talking about the INFJ being the oldest type, and you're probably wondering, what on earth does that mean? And so around this mysterious mystery, this enigmatic enigma, I'm going to keep, hopefully, your attention, for the next 10 minutes or so. Now, you'll see that there's a reason why I'm calling INFJs, or proposing to call INFJs, the oldest type, and that I do not mean by this, this is something that needs to be clarified straight away. I do not mean by this that INFJs are the oldest at heart, in the sense that we often, encounter descriptions of INFJs as old souls or whatever. So it's not what I mean. So maybe your interest is even more piqued now. So stay tuned. Just remember, first of all, that you can support me on Patreon, links below, and your support will be greatly appreciated. There's always need for more support so I can keep, my channel being sustainable. It's tough, man. Ireland is getting very expensive, and with my 9 to 5 and everything, it's tough. But I mean, my intention is definitely to keep this going because I'm enjoying this community with you. Yeah, there's also my 2 books, The Infinite Castle and The Ecstatic Soul. So that's my book on the INFJ, and that's my new novel. If you're interested, read the descriptions, check the links below and read the descriptions, and you can get the 2 of them if you want, or one of them, or whatever you prefer. But you have the links if you're curious. So now, in terms of the INFJ being the oldest type, what do I mean by this? This is a sort of intuition, and I don't mean any pun by this, that came to me whilst I was reading Jung. Because when you think about it, a lot of Jung's theory of the unconscious, of the collective unconscious, of the archetypes or primordial images, are based, if you like, on an implicit, at times actually quite explicit, genealogy of the psyche. When I say a genealogy of the psyche, I mean the genealogy of the human mind, the human psyche, as comprising conscious, unconscious, conscious on one hand, unconscious on the other. And if you've been following videos recently, you'll also remember that the unconscious comprises, in fact, the unconscious comprises different parts. There's like the personal unconscious, which is to do with contents that are personal to you. Their own collective unconscious, that's to do with the primordial images that are actually collective archetypes. And then there's what Jung calls the psychoid contents, that are contents whereby they're indeterminately linked to either psychological processes that are completely unconscious and not capable of coming to consciousness without being necessarily describable as personal or collective, or like purely physiological processes, like organic processes taking place at the subcortical level. I mean, this is what he hypothesizes at the time, these contents are so inaccessible to any sort of conscious scrutiny that it's impossible to sort of decide whether there is a fact on a matter on the question, are those contents really just psychically unconscious, or are they actually just physiological? But anyway, so Jung's theory of the psyche is based on this structuring of unconscious and conscious, and of this genealogy, this history of the psyche. Something that people, I think, sometimes don't appreciate enough in Jung is that there's this history of the psyche as it has evolved through time. Jung is very, you'll see the connection with the INFJ being the oldest type. This is controlled digression. It's importantly part of the process. Jung is fond of drawing parallels between the body and the psyche. This is part of how he articulates this theory of the archetypes. These images that we have in our unconscious, that are collective, that are essentially forms of what will be done, or what could be done. Sometimes he talks about it as the perceptual images, or the perceptual forms of the instincts. That's we have instinctual tendencies. With our free will, we can translate these into relatively autonomous actions. Now, the energy that's required is still coming from the instincts, but the direction in which we might lead those divestments of energies are actually predefined by collective images. So that's the archetypes. But the psyche was not always the same throughout time. Again, that's in his interpretation. So whenever Jung is speaking, as you might have come across, about the unconscious contents, and especially the unconscious, the personal unconscious, yes, but even more so the collective unconscious, he talks a lot about primitive, infantile, and archaic images. This is something that you would be not unfamiliar with if you've been watching my videos for a while. For example, our inferior functions being by definition the most unconscious, is the most likely to, when it erupts into consciousness, have this kind of archaic character, this kind of primitive character. Now, Jung uses these terms. When he means primitive, he does not mean, first of all, it's not a value judgment. Okay, it's not to say it's worse, it's dumb or stupid. When he says primitive, he literally is referring to primitive times. So, in other words, that perhaps could be less susceptible to being associated with value judgment is primordial. It has a primordial character. And Jung is particularly thinking of tribes in the really early civilizations. His point is that these tribes lived in a state, and it's a hypothesis, of very much pronounced in undifferentiation between conscious and unconscious. In other words, unconscious lives, which is why there was this very marked belief in actual spirits, actual gods, that trees embodied real being with real souls. That the things, it's not so much that modern man has stopped entertaining these beliefs as completely supernatural or superstitious. These contents for Jung, they exist still. The only difference is that consciousness has become differentiated, so that we're able to decide that these are actually just fantasy activity produced by our collective unconscious, or produced by our unconscious, and we're able to attribute it to unconscious contents. For primitive man, the fact that these contents were not differentiated means that he took them to be real, just like any other object. Okay? It's not that he made himself believe that they were real because he was superstitious. As far as his existence was concerned, he concretized everything. The notion of the abstract as something that was intangible did not exist. Everything that manifested itself as abstract in the primitive mind instantly concretized itself into objects, became concrete, and took a very concrete active part in their life. And Jung talks about how when he visited a lot of tribes in South America and Africa, when talking to tribes, he very much got the sense, and also through looking into their language and conducting interviews, that that kind of frame of mind was still very much there. So you might ask yourself, okay, this is very interesting. What's it got to do with the INFJ being the oldest type? Well, what's specific to INFJs, and we could bring in INTJs too in this, is that NI, as defined by Jung, is a function that is a function of peculiar perception and perceptiveness regarding unconscious contents, specifically the primordial images, which is why one of the favorite languages, you notice in NI dominant, by the way, if you see in them an affinity for symbolic language, for use of symbolic imagery that is not a persona, that is not something that they're doing because it's an affectation, and some people do that, so it's important to realize. If you're interacting with someone and they seem to sometimes even be able to express themselves best in images and symbols. Symbols is a more specific term than images. It's more precise. The symbol is an image of something that is not completely understood, but it's apprehended through intuition. Okay? So it's a symbol and has transformative power. Someone who expresses themselves in images a lot is likely to be an NI dominant. Because for them, the conduit of symbolic expression is actually the path of least resistance, the easiest form of expression in a lot of cases. And there are legitimately people, I've especially met them online, but also a few in academia, that just have this, it's nothing to do with having an affectation. Some of them might not even have any clue about the existence of MBTI or whatever, so they have no vested interest in appearing as this or that type or having this or that trait. But they will very quickly jump to an expression in terms of symbolic imagery to explain something. As at the moment, they're active on Discord. There's a couple people that I interact with. It's very, very striking. Now, what's the link? Well, look, expression and symbolic imagery, that is a manifest content that is not completely understood, but apprehended. And this primitive mind that is, as it were, directly in touch with the unconscious contents. In fact, so in touch with the unconscious contents that he or she or they lives through them. So it's almost as if the INFJ and the INTJ were living a life of primitive productionist symbolism combined with the necessary adaptation of directed thinking and consciousness to be able to exist and live and get by and cope and and have a normal life in the real world in this modern day environment, which requires super high level of conscious directed adaptation. So there's this conflict there between what the INFJ finds most primordial and meaningful in their apprehension of reality, which is heavily archaic and symbolic, very connected with these archetypes, and the demands of modern life, the environment, and the external world. And so you can really, I think, come to kind of realize there's a potential story there to explain another side of alienation. So because I talked about alienation in my book from an existential perspective, from a pre-psychological perspective, but here I'm talking about something that is also an historical perspective. How the modern INFJ might be a lot more alienated than the INFJ who existed in primitive times. You see what I'm saying? It's that the consequence would be that the INFJ, by themselves, in terms of their psychological and functional makeup, are bound to be existentially alienated and to have to come to terms with that. This might actually be a historical contingency linked to the advent of modernity and the technological world and the world of the most highly differentiated process of adaptation to the environment and mastery of the environment we've ever experienced. Could it be that the INFJ in some sense is the oldest type that ever was, that's the most primordial type, and that the challenge of adaptation to a world that is not like this is going to be consubstantial to the existence of any INFJ nowadays? I'm opening this question for you guys. And I love to hear what you have to say. All right, talk to you soon. Bye-bye.